This workshop is titled We Need New Names on Cultures of Care and Difficult Knowledge in Southern African University Museums. It comes out of a collaboration between scholars at the University of Fort Hare and Stellenbosch University. Collectively, we are concerned and focused on the idea of difficult knowledge in university spaces, as universities are often spaces that have difficulty telling their own history. And we're interested in work that tries to unearth these institutional archives and deal with the difficult and problematic knowledge that we sit with in these spaces. With regard to archives of disciplines, archives of political histories, art archives, anthropological archives, there are various layers that we want to try and understand and look at in terms of how they're being used as educational resources, how they're being used with younger generations of students to understand the past and think about the present.
Okay. The intellectual challenges that shaped the urgency of this gathering was sparked by me as an archivist, for instance, and my colleague as a senior curator, having our own kind of questions around what does it mean to have a different conception of what a university museum might be. As an institution, we don't have a museum currently. So this conversation then necessitated us to talk to other colleagues, to find out, colleagues that have museums in their institutions, to see how they are dealing with the questions of care in terms of our collections. How do we take care of our collections? How do we find new ways to name things that have been previously relegated to being unimportant, and kind of bringing them to the fore, all these questions that we have about museums and how the future of museums should look like.
With regards to institutional challenges that university museums are confronted with, I think us as the University of Fort Hare are confronted with the challenge of rethinking the idea of the museum, especially considering the fact that Fort Hare has a university collection that is in storage. We do not have a museum per se, but we have items that were once part of a university museum. So revisiting the idea of the museum in a university resonates with that kind of predicament that we find ourselves in. We are experimenting with new ideas on how to incorporate items that have been in storage that can then be used to influence our teaching, to influence research, as well as our community engagement drive. The colloquium is a way of rethinking the very idea of the museum that would then inform our practice as curators, especially in the division of curation and archiving as well.
Walking through Stellenbosch University's campus, we are exposed to the ways in which South Africa's segregationist, colonial and apartheid history had been woven into the very architecture of our campus. And that reveals tensions between the past and the present, discussions surrounding memorialization, public history, and what does the past mean to us today. So as part of this walking tour, it's become incredibly important for us to sit with that tension, to understand it, and also to guide people through their own experiences of the town. So expanding beyond the museum space, the walking tour could serve as a creative intervention, especially when it comes to public history and public engagements. It allows us to move through town, it allows us to encounter space and to have conversations about the past. So walking slowly through a space can be read as a creative intervention.
University archives help us in a sense that they become spaces where we can, vital spaces where we can rethink how narratives, and challenging Eurocentric biases in our own individual institutional art collections. So it's a platform where, there's a lot of reimagination. It creates spaces where, there's new narratives that can be, created through ways in which we can critically, examine and inquire through these, the university archives. And in terms of how historically black institutions operated, it's in a way to show how the pedagogical nature of how these institutions used to function. So in terms of how I looked at certain things in a curatorial manner, it was finding, contexts for these specific archives and, kind of like locating and placing and creating through using these hidden gems of in our storages.
I'm working on a project with my colleague Mtshemla called Working from the Overwhelmed Institution. So we're looking at forms of pedagogy that can maybe counteract some of the disenchantment that occurs within the South African University. And we think about kind of really inhabiting the space of the institution and actually treating it as we'd like it to be, in the hopes that it would become that. So, my side of it is very much based in the classroom and teaching for this particular workshop. But largely, in terms of working with archive and in my own research and kind of working with that bureaucracy that comes up.
I think what I always grapple with is the idea of an archive being just a passive thing to be looked at. And I think like an ethical practice for me is to really look at an archive as something that speaks to me, and I speak with it, speak to it, and really treating it in that sense. And I think that's quite an important aspect for me in terms of ethical conduct when we're dealing with archives and memory. I can only speak to the spirit of where Overwhelm came from, in the sense that we've got copious amounts of these archives that are amongst our midst. And do we then grow tired of actually engaging them? I don't think that's really a productive way of dealing with those archives. We need to actually engage those archives and in their overwhelmness nature. And I think the spirit of Overwhelmed is just the idea of having no other option but to just deal with what we have within our midst. But how do we then navigate and work with that in a very positive sense, in a very positive but a very generative sense as well? I think that's quite an important aspect for me.
So museum theatre and in performance general activates memory culture and archives in such a way that it offers an alternative way of thinking about memory and cultures and memorialization and collections, right? So it offers another kind of museum which is ephemeral, which is not the museum that is stagnant. It's not just a museum that is a building. This is a museum that is an event, the museum that disappears, not the museum that is concerned with collecting and hoarding and collecting and hoarding. So in the work, this performance work that I conceptualized called Kina, it's doing that in the sense of relying on the body for information, spontaneity, invitation, improvisation, and the happening, the event. which happens at night. And that is the different kind of museum that it is that it's a pop-up museum. It's not a static museum. It's a museum of movement.
Zine making functions as an alternative archival practice, I think because it is inherently self-reflective. In my zine, I press on reflections on slavery at the Vale Museum. I was thinking about my encounter with the archive as a slave descendant, and really thinking about how I was engaging with that archive on an affective basis, how it coincided or contradicted a lot of the theoretical work that I'd done before. And so in this experimental kind of medium, it allowed me to play with ideas and to play with my different methodologies that I'd been working with in my PhD. So it's a space of creativity, it's a space to play, and it's a place to ultimately try out ideas. I don't think that creative methodologies are inherently decolonial. And I think that there are certain creative methodologies that can contribute to a decolonial project within the museum space. But I think that we do have to be careful in kind of conflating creative and artistic methodologies with decolonial methodologies. Of course, if an artist is working in a deliberately decolonial manner, then that is a different story. But I think that we should be just as critical of artistic and creative methodologies as we are with any other type of approach to the museum or a colonially produced institution.